Elaine Brooks was folding white linen napkins beside the dinner plates when she noticed Vanessa standing in the kitchen doorway with her phone raised. At first, Elaine assumed her daughter-in-law was filming the table setting for social media. The dining room looked beautiful after all. The polished silverware reflected the warm kitchen lights, and the smell of rosemary pot roast drifted through the house. Then Vanessa laughed. "Our live-in maid," she said loudly into the camera. "At least she's good for something." The words froze Elaine's hands in midair. For a second, the entire room felt painfully still. Elaine slowly looked up. Their eyes met briefly, but Vanessa only shrugged with a careless smile before tapping her screen and walking away. 10 minutes later, Elaine sat alone at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone. The video was already online. Friends of Vanessa had reacted with laughing emojis and comments. One comment hurt more than all the others combined. Mason had replied with a laughing face. Her own son. Elaine didn't cry. She didn't scream. What she felt was colder than anger. Clarity. For the past year, Mason and Vanessa had been living upstairs in her Portland home, temporarily, while saving for a place of their own. During that year, Elaine had quietly become the cook, cleaner, shopper, laundress, and unpaid caretaker of two perfectly healthy adults. And somehow, without noticing it happen, she had disappeared inside her own house. Elaine stood slowly, walked to the coat rack, and slipped on her wool coat. She picked up her purse and keys without making a sound. Neither Mason nor Vanessa noticed her leave. Outside, cold Oregon rain tapped softly against the driveway as she climbed into her car. She drove 20 minutes across town to Silver Pine's bed and breakfast, a quiet little place overlooking the river. That night, sitting alone on the balcony outside her room, Elaine replayed the video one final time. "Our live-in maid." She stared at the words for several long seconds. Then she calmly opened her banking app. The grocery card Vanessa used every week was connected to Elaine's account. Elaine pressed one button. Card canceled. She set the phone down beside her untouched cup of tea and listened to the rain rolling through the dark pine trees. For the first time in months, the silence felt peaceful. By morning, Mason and Vanessa were going to learn something they had completely forgotten. There was a very big difference between living in Elaine Brooks' house and owning it. The next morning, Elaine woke to pale winter sunlight spilling across the curtains of her room at Silver Pine's bed and breakfast. For a few peaceful seconds, she forgot everything. Then her phone buzzed sharply against the wooden nightstand. 3 missed calls. 2 texts, all from Vanessa. Elaine sat up slowly and opened the messages. Why is my card getting declined? I'm standing at checkout with a full cart. The panic in the words almost made Elaine smile. Almost. She slipped out of bed, wrapped herself in the thick hotel robe, and stepped onto the small balcony overlooking the river. Cold morning air brushed against her cheeks while fog drifted across the water below. For the first time in over a year, nobody needed breakfast from her. Nobody expected laundry. Nobody expected anything. Her phone started ringing again. Vanessa. Elaine let it ring until it stopped. Then she calmly walked back inside, showered, dressed, and enjoyed a quiet breakfast downstairs in the dining room. Fresh coffee, warm croissants, strawberry jam. Simple things she had not enjoyed peacefully in months. Around noon, she finally drove home. The moment Elaine stepped through the front door, she heard quick footsteps approaching across the hardwood floor. Vanessa appeared first, face red with anger. "What the hell happened at the store this morning?" she snapped. "My card got declined in front of everyone." Elaine quietly removed her gloves. "Yes," she answered calmly. "I canceled it." Vanessa blinked in disbelief. "You canceled it? Why would you do that?" Before Elaine could answer, Mason entered from the living room, already tense. "Mom," he said carefully, "you can't just cut us off without warning?" Elaine slowly turned toward her son. "Cut you off?" she repeated softly. "Mason, you're both 30 years old." Neither of them answered. She walked into the kitchen and set her purse down neatly on the counter. "That card was supposed to help occasionally with shared groceries," Elaine continued. "Not support 2 adults living here rent-free for over a year." Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. So this is about that stupid video? Elaine met her eyes directly for the first time since yesterday. No, she said evenly. The video simply showed me the truth. The kitchen fell silent. Mason rubbed the back of his neck uncomfortably. Mom, Vanessa was joking. Elaine gave a small nod. And now I'm serious. She extended her hand calmly toward Vanessa. I'd like the card back. Vanessa hesitated before digging through her purse aggressively. She slapped the card onto the counter. Elaine picked it up without emotion and slipped it into her pocket. Then she opened the refrigerator, removed a container of soup, and began heating lunch for one. Neither Mason nor Vanessa spoke while she carried the bowl to the table and sat down alone. For the first time, the house no longer felt like theirs. And deep down, all three of them knew it. The house stayed unusually quiet for the rest of the afternoon. Elaine finished her soup alone at the kitchen table, while Mason and Vanessa lingered awkwardly in the living room, pretending to watch television. Every few minutes, she could hear Vanessa whispering angrily under her breath. Elaine ignored it. After washing her single bowl and spoon, she dried her hands carefully and walked toward the staircase. Halfway up, she noticed 2 overflowing laundry baskets sitting outside the upstairs loft. Normally, every Wednesday morning, she carried them downstairs herself. She separated colors, started loads, folded clothes neatly, and left everything outside their bedroom doors before dinner. Today, she simply walked past the baskets. Inside her own bedroom, Elaine opened the curtains and let soft gray daylight fill the room. She suddenly noticed how peaceful the space felt without someone barging in every few hours asking where things were. Where's the extra charger? Did you wash my white sweater? Can you pick something up from the store? For months, her entire life had revolved around small, endless requests. No more, she thought quietly. That evening, she settled into the living room with a book and a cup of tea. Rain tapped softly against the windows, while the fireplace crackled nearby. A few minutes later, Mason wandered into the room carrying a wrinkled blue dress shirt. Mom? He began carefully. Did you already do the laundry downstairs? Elaine looked up from her book. No. He blinked. Oh. He shifted awkwardly. I kinda need this shirt cleaned for tomorrow. Elaine took a slow sip of tea. The washing machine still works perfectly, Mason? His face tightened slightly. Right. Yeah, I know. It's just, He sighed. You usually handle it. Usually. That single word explained everything. Elaine placed her teacup down gently. No, you're 30 years old? She said calmly. You have a full-time job, a car, and a wife. I believe you can manage a load of laundry. Mason opened his mouth, then closed it again. Before he could respond, Vanessa stormed downstairs wearing expensive workout clothes and irritation across her face. This is getting ridiculous, she snapped. You're acting like we committed some horrible crime over one dumb joke. Elaine remained perfectly calm. You publicly called me your maid. It was sarcasm. It was honesty, Elaine corrected quietly. Vanessa threw her hands into the air dramatically. Oh my God, Elaine, you are so sensitive. That word hit differently than the others. Sensitive, as if exhaustion, disrespect, and humiliation were simply personality flaws. Elaine slowly closed her book. Ave for 1 year, she said evenly. I cooked your meals, cleaned your dishes, bought your groceries, washed your clothes, and gave you a home without charging $1 in rent. Neither of them spoke. And somehow, Elaine continued, you both convinced yourselves that was normal. Vanessa scoffed loudly. We never asked you to do all that. Elaine almost laughed at the absurdity. No, they never asked. They simply expected. That was worse. Mason looked genuinely uncomfortable now. He stared down at the wrinkled shirt in his hands, instead of meeting his mother's eyes. Elaine stood slowly, carrying her tea toward the kitchen. Dinner's in the refrigerator if you want something, she said calmly. You can heat it yourselves. Vanessa frowned. You're not cooking tonight? No. What are we supposed to eat? Elaine paused beside the kitchen doorway and finally looked directly at her daughter-in-law. Whatever adults eat, when nobody mothers them." Then she disappeared into the kitchen, leaving behind a silence so heavy, neither Mason nor Vanessa knew how to answer it. Wednesday morning arrived with steady Oregon rain drumming softly against the windows of the Maplewood house. Elaine woke early out of habit. For years, she had started every morning the same way. Coffee brewing before sunrise, laundry sorted downstairs, breakfast prepared before Mason even left for work. But this morning felt different. Peaceful. She wrapped herself in a soft gray cardigan and carried her coffee into the living room. Pale light filtered through the tall front windows, while the fireplace warmed the quiet house. No television blaring upstairs. No requests, no demands. Elaine sat down with the newspaper and realized something surprising. She could finally hear her own thoughts again. An hour later, heavy footsteps sounded above her ceiling, followed by muffled voices. Then came the familiar sound of frustration. "Seriously!" Vanessa snapped upstairs. "Why are there no clean towels?" Elaine calmly turned the page of her newspaper. A few moments later, Mason appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking tired and irritated. He held a damp towel over one shoulder. "Mom," he began carefully, "did you forget to start the laundry?" Elaine looked up slowly from the paper. "No." Mason frowned as though the answer genuinely confused him. "You always do towels on Wednesday mornings." Elaine folded the newspaper neatly onto her lap. "And now you do." For a second, Mason simply stared at her. "But Vanessa has Pilates this morning, and I've got work in an hour." Elaine almost smiled, as if adulthood had somehow arrived unexpectedly. "The washing machine is downstairs," she replied evenly. "Detergent is under the sink." Mason exhaled sharply through his nose. "You're really serious about all this?" Elaine met his eyes calmly. Yes, he looked like he wanted to argue further, but instead turned and headed toward the basement, muttering under his breath. A few minutes later, Vanessa stormed downstairs, wearing leggings and an oversized sweater. Her blonde hair pulled into a messy ponytail. "This house feels insane right now," she complained loudly while digging through kitchen drawers. "Everything's becoming some weird power game." Elaine silently sipped her coffee. Vanessa opened the refrigerator, stared inside, then slammed the door harder than necessary. "And why is there barely any food?" she demanded. "Because I bought groceries for myself this week," Elaine answered calmly. Vanessa gave a sharp laugh. "You're unbelievable." Elaine watched her carefully for a long moment. What struck her most was not the anger. It was the entitlement beneath it. Vanessa truly believed Elaine's labor belonged to her. That realization changed something permanent inside her. After Vanessa left for Pilates and Mason drove to work, the house finally became quiet again. Elaine stood slowly and walked through the downstairs rooms one by one. For the first time in months, she looked carefully at the evidence of their presence everywhere. Vanessa's fashion magazines scattered across the coffee table. Mason's sneakers blocking the hallway. Protein shake cups abandoned beside the sofa. Phone chargers tangled across countertops. Bit by bit, they had spread across her home until Elaine herself had become the visitor. Not anymore. She grabbed a large woven basket from the laundry room and calmly began collecting everything. Shoes, magazines, coffee mugs, sweatshirts, charging cables. Half an hour later, the basket overflowed with their belongings. Elaine carried it upstairs and placed it directly outside the loft door. Then she returned downstairs and stood quietly in the middle of the living room. Near the guest room sat her old wingback chair covered beneath a linen sheet. Harold, her late husband, had bought it for her nearly 20 years earlier. Vanessa hated the chair.
Called it outdated.
Too bulky, too old-fashioned for the modern aesthetic. Elaine pulled the cover away slowly and smiled. The deep green fabric still looked beautiful. With surprising strength, she dragged the chair across the hardwood floor and positioned it directly beside the large front window where morning sunlight poured through. Perfect. That evening, Vanessa stopped dead in the living room doorway. "What is that doing here?" she demanded. Elaine settled comfortably into the chair with her book. "My chair," she answered calmly. Vanessa crossed her arms. "It completely ruins the room." Elaine looked up at her without the slightest trace of apology. "This," she said softly, "is my room. The tension inside the Maplewood house settled into something cold and constant over the next 2 days. Nobody argued openly anymore. That almost made things worse. Vanessa moved through the downstairs rooms with dramatic silence, slamming cabinets and sighing heavily whenever Elaine entered the kitchen. Mason avoided eye contact entirely, speaking only when absolutely necessary before disappearing upstairs each evening. Elaine no longer chased peace. For too long, she had mistaken silence for harmony while quietly sacrificing pieces of herself to keep everyone comfortable. Now she noticed things she once ignored, like how Vanessa walked into her bedroom without knocking whenever she needed something. Or how Mason treated Elaine's home office like public storage space, dropping unopened mail and Amazon packages inside without asking. The final straw came Thursday afternoon. Elaine had returned from gardening in the backyard when she heard drawers opening upstairs in her bedroom. She climbed the stairs quietly. Vanessa stood inside her bathroom holding Elaine's expensive hand cream. "Oh," Vanessa said casually when she noticed her. "I was just borrowing this." Elaine looked around the room slowly. Several closet drawers stood open. A shopping bag sat tossed carelessly across the bed. Something inside Elaine hardened completely. That evening, after dinner, she sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open while rain rolled steadily against the windows. She searched for local handymen. The next morning at 8 sharp, Leon arrived. He was a sturdy gray-haired man in work boots who had repaired half the homes in Maplewood over the years. Elaine greeted him warmly and led him through the downstairs hallway. "I need new locks installed," she explained. "Bedroom and office?" Elaine nodded. "Good quality ones." Leon glanced toward the staircase knowingly, but asked no questions. By the time Vanessa finally wandered downstairs in silk pajamas carrying her phone, Leon was already drilling the new lock into Elaine's office door. Vanessa stopped mid-step. "What's going on?" Elaine stood calmly beside the hallway table, holding a fresh set of brass keys. "I'm adding locks." Vanessa frowned. "Why?" "Because I want privacy." Vanessa laughed once in disbelief. "Privacy from who?" Elaine slipped one of the keys into her cardigan pocket. "From anyone entering my rooms without permission." The silence that followed turned sharp instantly. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. "You're seriously locking us out?" Elaine met her gaze evenly. "I'm locking my rooms." "That's ridiculous." "No," Elaine answered quietly. "What's ridiculous is feeling like a guest inside my own house." Vanessa opened her mouth to argue again, but Leon's drill interrupted the moment with a loud mechanical whine. An hour later, the work was finished. Leon handed Elaine 2 polished key sets. "Everything's secure now," he said kindly. Elaine thanked him and paid cash at the front door. The second his truck disappeared down the street, Vanessa walked directly to Elaine's office and grabbed the handle. "Locked." She rattled it harder. "Still locked." Elaine watched calmly from the kitchen while drying a coffee mug. "You cannot be serious," Vanessa snapped. "I am." "What exactly are you hiding in there?" Elaine folded the dish towel neatly over the counter edge. My piece." For a brief second, Vanessa looked genuinely stunned, as if she had never considered Elaine might deserve peace too. Upstairs, footsteps sounded heavily across the loft floor as Mason got ready for work. A few minutes later, he appeared halfway down the stairs, already sensing tension. "What happened now?" Vanessa pointed furiously toward the office door. "She locked us out!" Mason blinked at his mother. "Mom?" Elaine interrupted gently. "My bedroom and office are private spaces now. Upstairs belongs to you two. Downstairs belongs to me." Mason rubbed his forehead wearily. "Can't we just stop making everything into a battle?" Elaine looked at her son for a long moment. That sentence hurt because it revealed exactly how he saw the situation. Not boundaries, not disrespect, just inconvenience. She walked toward the living room slowly, stopping beside her wingback chair. "There wouldn't be a battle," she said quietly, "if you had remembered this was my home before I had to remind you." Then she sat down by the window while rain drifted softly across the glass. And for the first time in years, Elaine felt truly protected inside her own house. Saturday morning arrived cold and gray over Portland. Elaine stood at the kitchen sink, watching rainwater slide down the backyard windows, while the coffee machine hummed softly behind her. Upstairs, the loft remained quiet. Mason and Vanessa were still asleep after coming home late the night before. For years, Elaine used to treasure Saturday mornings. Back when Harold was alive, they would drive downtown for fresh pastries, stop by the flower market, then spend the afternoon working in the garden together. The garage had once been Harold's favorite place in the house. He kept his tools lined neatly along the walls and always parked the car inside before sunset. Now the garage barely looked recognizable. It had become a storage unit for Mason and Vanessa's abandoned life. Boxes stacked to the ceiling, old furniture wrapped in plastic, workout equipment nobody touched, suitcases, winter decorations, broken lamps. Elaine's own car had spent nearly a year parked outside in Oregon rain, while their clutter stayed warm and dry. She finished her coffee slowly and made a decision. By 9 o'clock, the garage door rumbled open. Cold air swept inside as pale morning light revealed the mountain of boxes crowding the space. Elaine tied back her silver hair, slipped on gardening gloves, and wheeled out the small flat cart from the garden shed. Then she started moving everything, one box at a time. The work was exhausting. Several containers were heavier than she expected, and halfway through the morning, her lower back ached fiercely. Still, she continued steadily, pushing boxes across the driveway toward the covered backyard carport. She wasn't destroying anything, wasn't throwing belongings away. She simply relocated them out of her space. By noon, sweat dampened the collar of her sweater despite the cold weather. Elaine paused briefly to stretch her back and looked around the nearly empty garage. For the first time in months, she could see the concrete floor again. She smiled quietly. 2 more hours later, the job was finished. Every single box now sat neatly organized beneath the large covered carport behind the house. Elaine grabbed a broom and slowly swept dust and leaves from the garage floor. The familiar scent of motor oil and cedar wood drifted through the air, stirring old memories of Harold whistling softly while fixing things beside his workbench. By the time she parked her car squarely inside the garage, the sky had darkened again with rain clouds. The automatic garage door closed with a smooth mechanical hum. The sound felt strangely satisfying. At nearly 5 o'clock, Mason's car pulled into the driveway. Seconds later, the front door slammed hard enough to shake the hallway pictures. "Mom!" Elaine sat calmly in her wingback chair, sorting through an old photo album. Mason stormed into the living room, soaked from rain and visibly furious. "What happened to all our stuff?" Elaine glanced up peacefully. "I moved it." "You moved it outside?" "To the covered carport." Vanessa appeared behind him, eyes wide with disbelief. "You had no right to touch our things." Elaine closed the photo album gently on her lap. "I had every right," she answered calmly. "It's my garage." Mason ran a hand through his wet hair. "Mom, that stuff can't stay out there." "You're right," Elaine agreed. "You should probably organize it this weekend." Vanessa laughed bitterly. "This is unbelievable. You're acting like we're strangers." Elaine looked directly at her. "No," she said softly. "I'm acting like the homeowner." The room fell silent. Rain tapped steadily against the windows, while tension spread through the house like cold smoke. Mason stared at his mother with an expression Elaine had never seen before. Not anger, confusion. As though he suddenly realized the version of Elaine he depended on no longer existed. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "We're going to a birthday dinner tonight," he muttered. "We don't have time to deal with this." Elaine reopened the photo album. "Then you'll have to make time tomorrow." Vanessa shook her head in disgust before storming upstairs. Mason lingered behind a moment longer. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. Elaine looked out toward the rain-covered driveway. "Because," she answered after a long pause, "I got tired of disappearing inside my own life." Mason said nothing, and for once, he had no argument left. By Sunday morning, the atmosphere inside the Maplewood house had changed completely. The warmth that once filled the downstairs rooms was gone, replaced by careful footsteps, closed doors, and long stretches of silence. Mason and Vanessa barely spoke to Elaine anymore unless absolutely necessary. Elaine didn't mind. In fact, the quiet felt healthier than forced politeness. She woke early, tied her robe at the waist, and headed toward the kitchen expecting a peaceful breakfast. But the moment she opened the refrigerator door, she noticed something strange. Half her groceries were missing. The smoked cheddar she bought from Bellamy Gourmet Store, the raspberry yogurt, fresh fruit, even the small loaf of rosemary bread she had picked up the day before. In their place sat a folded sticky note written in Vanessa's sharp handwriting. "Since you want everything separate now, we're separating food too. We borrowed a few things because we haven't gone shopping yet. We'll replace them later." Elaine stared at the note for several seconds. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. Vanessa still believed this was a game about emotions. A contest over who could frustrate the other person first. But Elaine was no longer reacting emotionally. She was changing the structure itself. Calmly, she folded the note and set it beside the coffee maker. Then she made herself tea and sat quietly by the window while rain drifted through the garden outside. An hour later, Vanessa came downstairs dressed for brunch with friends. She stopped briefly when she saw Elaine sitting there. "You saw the note?" she asked coldly. Elaine nodded once. "I did." "Well, it's fair." Vanessa continued defensively. "You keep acting like we're invading your life." Elaine took a slow sip of tea. "You are." Vanessa rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh my God!" Without another word, she grabbed her purse and left the house. The front door slammed behind her hard enough to rattle the hallway mirror. Elaine waited until the sound of the car disappeared down the street. Then she stood up, walked calmly into her office, and opened her laptop. 20 minutes later, she ordered a compact silver refrigerator with a freezer compartment. Private delivery. Monday morning installation. Exactly what she needed. The fridge arrived shortly after noon the next day. 2 delivery men carried it carefully into Elaine's office while Mason stood frozen in the hallway watching. "You're putting a refrigerator in there?" he asked slowly. Elaine signed the delivery receipt. "Yes, but why?" Elaine opened the small fridge door and smiled softly at the empty shelves. "Because I want my own food." Mason looked genuinely unsettled now. "That's a little extreme, don't you think?" Elaine turned toward him calmly. "No, Mason. Extreme is living in someone else's home while expecting them to feed you indefinitely." He looked away immediately. That afternoon, Elaine drove to Bellamy Gourmet Store alone. For the first time in months, grocery shopping felt relaxing instead of exhausting. She wandered slowly through the aisles, choosing exactly what she wanted. Fresh salmon, imported cheese, good coffee, her favorite white wine, dark chocolate, small luxuries she used to avoid buying because she was constantly feeding 3 adults instead of 1. Back home, she carefully arranged everything inside the new office refrigerator. Then she locked the office door. That evening, Mason and Vanessa returned home carrying takeout bags. Vanessa opened the kitchen refrigerator and frowned instantly. "There's literally nothing in here," she complained. Elaine looked up from her book in the living room. "There's your food." Vanessa turned sharply. "Where's yours?" "In my office." "You're seriously hiding food now?" Elaine marked her page calmly before answering. "No, I'm protecting what belongs to me." Vanessa scoffed loudly and slammed the refrigerator shut. But Mason stayed quiet. Because for the first time, he was beginning to see something clearly. His mother had not become cruel. She had simply stopped sacrificing herself to make other people comfortable. And neither he nor Vanessa knew how to live without that sacrifice anymore. Friday evening arrived with freezing rain and dark clouds hanging low over Portland. Elaine sat comfortably in her green wingback chair beside the front window. A blanket draped across her lap, and a glass of white wine resting on the small table beside her. Soft jazz played quietly from the speaker near the fireplace, while she worked on a watercolor painting inside her new craft room. For the first time in years, the downstairs finally felt peaceful again. Then headlights swept across the living room walls. Elaine glanced toward the driveway. A second car had pulled in behind Mason's SUV. She frowned slightly. Moments later, the front door burst open with loud, cheerful voices. "Come in! Be careful, the floor's wet!" Vanessa called brightly. Elaine immediately recognized the couple stepping inside behind her. Mr. and Mrs. Carter. Vanessa's parents each carried a rolling suitcase. Elaine slowly lowered her wine glass. Interesting. No one had mentioned visitors. Vanessa entered the living room wearing a huge smile that vanished almost instantly when she noticed Elaine sitting calmly by the window. "Oh," Vanessa said awkwardly. "You're home." Elaine almost smiled at the absurdity of the statement. It was still her house. "Good evening," Elaine replied politely. Mr. Carter gave a stiff nod while Mrs. Carter offered an uncomfortable smile. They clearly sensed tension already lingering in the air. Vanessa clapped her hands together brightly. "Well, let me show you guys the guest room so you can settle in." Elaine said nothing. She simply watched. Vanessa walked confidently down the hallway toward the former guest suite. Then she grabbed the doorknob. Locked. Her smile disappeared instantly. She tried again, harder. Still locked. Vanessa turned slowly toward Elaine. "Why is this door locked?" Elaine crossed one leg calmly over the other. "Because that room is no longer available." Confusion spread across Mrs. Carter's face. "What do you mean?" Vanessa demanded sharply. "My parents are staying all weekend." "You should have asked first," Elaine answered evenly. Vanessa stared at her in disbelief. "You cannot be serious right now." Elaine stood slowly from the chair. "Actually," she replied calmly, "I'm completely serious." She walked down the hallway and unlocked the door herself. Vanessa immediately pushed past her into the room, then froze. The old guest bedroom no longer existed. The bed was gone. In its place stood bookshelves, art supplies, a sewing table, baskets of fabric, and a large watercolor easel beside the windows. Elaine's lavender craft studio. Vanessa spun around furiously. "You turned the guest room into this?" Elaine nodded. "Yes. But where are my parents supposed to sleep?" Elaine looked toward the upstairs loft. "With you." The silence that followed felt painfully awkward. Mrs. Carter shifted uncomfortably beside the doorway while Mr. Carter cleared his throat. Vanessa lowered her voice into a furious whisper. "You're embarrassing me on purpose." "No," Elaine corrected gently. "I'm establishing boundaries." Vanessa laughed bitterly. "They're family!" Elaine met her eyes steadily. "So am I." That sentence landed harder than shouting ever could. Mason finally appeared from upstairs after hearing the tension. "What's going on?" Vanessa turned toward him immediately. "She locked your parents out of the guest room." Elaine folded her hands calmly in front of her. "The room was converted weeks ago," she explained. "Nobody asked permission before inviting overnight guests." Mason looked trapped instantly. His eyes moved from his furious wife to her embarrassed parents, and finally to his mother, standing quietly in the hallway. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Elaine stepped aside politely. "You have plenty of room upstairs," she said. "I'm sure everyone will manage." Vanessa looked ready to explode, but under her parents' uncomfortable gaze, she swallowed the argument. Mason silently picked up one of the suitcases. "Come on," he muttered quietly. "We'll make space upstairs." The Carters followed awkwardly. Vanessa remained behind one extra second, glaring at Elaine with open hatred. But Elaine no longer feared that look, because something inside her had changed permanently. She no longer needed Vanessa's approval to feel entitled to her own home. As the footsteps disappeared upstairs, Elaine calmly relocked the craft room door. Then she returned to her wingback chair, lifted her wine glass, and listened to the rain tapping softly against the windows while the house settled around her once again. The rest of the weekend passed beneath a layer of strained politeness. Vanessa's parents stayed mostly upstairs, emerging only occasionally for coffee before leaving for long drives around Portland. Mrs. Carter barely looked Elaine in the eye anymore, while Mr. Carter seemed determined to avoid conversation entirely. Elaine didn't take it personally. The awkwardness belonged to Vanessa, not her. Sunday evening finally arrived, and the Carters packed their suitcases in obvious relief. By 6 o'clock, their car disappeared down the wet street, leaving the Maplewood house heavy with silence once again. Elaine stood in the backyard trimming dead roses beneath the porch light when the sliding door opened behind her. Mason stepped outside with his hands shoved into his jacket pockets. For a moment, neither spoke. Cold air drifted through the garden, carrying the scent of rain and damp cedar. Finally, Mason sighed. Friday was rough. Elaine continued clipping branches carefully. I imagine it was. Mason shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa's really upset. Elaine almost smiled at how familiar those words had become. Vanessa's upset. Vanessa's frustrated. Vanessa's embarrassed. As though Vanessa's emotions automatically outweighed everyone else's comfort. Elaine placed the garden shears down slowly. You know what's interesting? She said quietly. Not once in this entire situation have either of you asked whether I'm upset. Mason looked down immediately. The silence confirmed everything. Elaine wiped dirt gently from her gardening gloves. For over a year, you and Vanessa treated this house like a hotel. She continued calmly. You used the electricity, the water, the heat, the kitchen, the garage, and my time. We were saving, Mason muttered weakly. And I was helping, Elaine replied. There's a difference. Mason rubbed his forehead tiredly. We didn't mean for things to get like this. Elaine believed him. That was the problem. Disrespect had not arrived dramatically. It happened slowly through assumptions, convenience, and entitlement disguised as comfort. She reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a large, white envelope. Mason frowned. What's that? Elaine handed it to him calmly. A rental agreement. His expression changed instantly. You're kidding. No. Mason opened the envelope slowly, while rainwater dripped softly from the roof gutters nearby. His eyes moved rapidly across the pages. Monthly rent, utilities, shared household expectations, 30-day notice terms, everything professionally written and completely reasonable. Still, he looked horrified. Mom? He stared up at her. You want us to pay rent? Elaine folded her arms gently against the cold. I want adults living in my house to contribute like adults. But we're trying to save for a home, Mason argued. If we start paying rent now, it'll take us years longer. Elaine's face softened slightly. For a brief second, she saw the little boy he used to be, the child who once scraped his knees riding bikes in the same backyard. Then she remembered the laughing emoji beneath Vanessa's video. The softness disappeared. You should have considered that before treating me like staff, she answered quietly. Mason looked stunned. The truth hurt because it was undeniable. You're really serious about this, he whispered. Yes. The sliding door suddenly flew open behind them. Vanessa stormed onto the patio wrapped in an oversized sweater. Mason, are you seriously out here discussing this? She snapped, before noticing the envelope in his hands. Her eyes narrowed instantly. What's that? Mason hesitated. Vanessa grabbed the papers from him aggressively and skimmed the first page. Then she laughed in disbelief. Oh my God. Her voice rose sharply. You're charging us rent now? Elaine remained calm. Yes. This is insane. No, Elaine replied softly. What was insane was believing this arrangement could continue forever. Vanessa shook the papers angrily. You're punishing us. Elaine looked directly at her. No, I'm correcting the balance. For several long seconds, only rain filled the silence between them. Then Elaine spoke one final time. You have two choices, she said evenly. You can sign the agreement and stay here respectfully as tenants. She paused. Or you can find another place to live within 3 months. Vanessa stared at her speechless. Mason looked exhausted. But for the first time since all of this began, Elaine felt completely calm. Because the guilt that once controlled her was finally gone. And without guilt, her boundaries no longer shook. The days after the rental agreement felt strangely quiet. No shouting, no slammed doors, no dramatic confrontations. The tension inside the Maplewood house had changed into something heavier and more uncomfortable. Reality. Vanessa barely came downstairs anymore unless she needed coffee before work. Mason moved through the house with tired eyes and careful silence, as though every conversation now required energy he no longer had. Elaine watched the change calmly. For the first time in over a year, she no longer organized her life around managing everyone else's emotions. And slowly, the house itself began changing too. The upstairs laundry basket no longer overflowed because Mason actually started washing clothes himself. The kitchen sink stayed cleaner. Takeout containers disappeared from the coffee table. Shoes stopped blocking the hallway. Small things, adult things. One rainy Tuesday evening, Elaine sat in her craft room painting pale blue hydrangeas when she heard a soft knock on the office door. Not pounding, not rattling the handle, knocking. Elaine set down her paintbrush. "Come in." The door opened slowly. Mason stood there holding the white rental agreement envelope in one hand. He looked exhausted, older somehow. Elaine quietly removed her reading glasses while he stepped inside. For several seconds, he simply stared around the room. The shelves of fabric, the watercolor supplies, the peaceful lamp beside the armchair. "This room used to be yours," he said quietly. Elaine tilted her head slightly. "It still is." Mason gave a tired smile at that. Then he handed her the envelope. "We signed it." Elaine accepted the papers calmly and opened them. Both signatures sat neatly at the bottom of the final page. Vanessa Brooks. Mason Brooks. A strange sadness moved quietly through Elaine's chest. Not because she regretted her decision, because this was the moment she fully understood something painful. Her son had never truly become an adult until he was forced to. Mason rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "We'll pay on the 1st of every month," he said. "Utilities, too." Elaine nodded once. "Thank you." Silence settled briefly between them. Then Mason surprised her. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Elaine looked up slowly. "For what?" Mason swallowed hard. "For all of it." His voice sounded strained now. "The video, the joke, laughing at it." He looked away. "I didn't realize how bad things had gotten." Elaine studied him carefully. For once, he wasn't defending Vanessa, wasn't minimizing anything. He simply looked ashamed. "That's because none of it felt bad for you," Elaine answered gently. Mason flinched slightly. "The truth hurt." "I know," he admitted softly. Downstairs, the front door opened and shut. Vanessa was home. The tension immediately returned to Mason's shoulders. "She still thinks you're overreacting," he confessed quietly. "But I don't anymore." Elaine leaned back slowly in her chair. Outside the office windows, rain rolled softly across the dark garden. "Sometimes people mistake kindness for permission," she said calmly. "And when the kindness stops, they call it cruelty." Mason stared at the floor. "I should have defended you." Elaine's expression softened slightly. "Yes," she said. "You should have." A heavy silence followed. Then Mason looked up again. "We've been looking at apartments." Elaine wasn't surprised. "With the rent now," he continued carefully, "it probably makes more sense for us to leave sooner." Elaine folded the signed agreement neatly and placed it on the desk. "I think that's a good idea." Mason nodded slowly, though sadness flickered briefly across his face. This had once been home. Real home. Not just free housing. But somewhere along the way, they had forgotten the difference. As he turned toward the door, Elaine stopped him gently. "Mason?" He paused. Elaine looked at her son for a long moment before speaking. "I love you," she said quietly. "But loving someone doesn't mean disappearing for them." Mason's eyes lowered. Then he nodded once and walked out of the room. And after the door closed behind him, Elaine returned to her painting with steady, peaceful hands, while the house settled softly around her once more. 4 months later, the upstairs loft stood almost empty. Brown cardboard boxes lined the hallway walls while the sound of tape ripping echoed softly through the house. Rain clouds drifted low over Portland again, but this time the weather no longer felt heavy to Elaine. It felt clean, fresh, like the end of a long storm. Elaine stood quietly in the kitchen finishing her morning coffee while movers carried the last furniture pieces downstairs from the loft. Mason followed behind them, carrying a lamp beneath one arm. Vanessa walked several steps ahead, focused entirely on her phone. Things between Elaine and Vanessa had never truly recovered. But they had changed. Vanessa no longer left messes downstairs, no longer entered rooms without asking, no longer expected meals, laundry, money, or emotional labor to magically appear around her. Distance had replaced entitlement. And strangely enough, the distance felt healthier for everyone. The new apartment at Riverside Heights was smaller than the beachside townhouse Vanessa once dreamed about. There would be no luxury vacations this summer. No expensive furniture upgrades, no carefree spending. Real adulthood had arrived instead. Mason carried the final box toward the front door before pausing beside Elaine. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small set of keys gently onto the kitchen counter. "The upstairs keys," he said quietly. Elaine looked down at them. Such small objects for something that had once carried so much weight. "You didn't have to rush out," she said softly. Mason gave a tired smile. "I think we all needed our own space." Elaine nodded. "Yes," she admitted. "I think so too." From outside, Vanessa called impatiently for him to hurry. Mason glanced toward the driveway before looking back at his mother one final time. "I really am sorry," he said quietly. This time, Elaine believed him completely. Not because he said the words, because he finally understood them. She stepped forward and straightened the collar of his coat the same way she used to when he was little. "I know," she answered gently. Emotion flickered briefly across Mason's face before he pulled her into a quick hug. Then he grabbed the last bag and walked out the front door. A few moments later, the SUV disappeared slowly down the wet street. And just like that, the house became silent. Real silent. Elaine stood alone in the entryway for several long seconds, listening carefully. No television upstairs, no footsteps overhead, no tension pressing against the walls. Only quiet. She walked slowly through the downstairs rooms. The kitchen counters were spotless. The hallway stood empty. No sneakers, no laundry baskets, no abandoned coffee cups. Sunlight drifted softly through the living room windows, landing across the green fabric of her wingback chair beside the fireplace. Her chair, her room, her home. Elaine carried a fresh cup of coffee to the chair and sat down slowly, wrapping both hands around the warmth of the mug. Outside, rainwater glistened on the garden roses Harold once planted years ago. For a long moment, she simply breathed. Then her eyes drifted toward the hallway where everything had begun months earlier. One careless video, one humiliating caption. "Our live-in maid." Elaine shook her head softly. They had believed the house belonged to them because she gave so much of herself away, without limits. The groceries, the laundry, the cooking, the cleaning, the money, the emotional peacekeeping. All of it had slowly erased her until she barely recognized herself anymore. But she understood something now that she wished she had learned years earlier. Love without boundaries becomes permission. Kindness without respect becomes exploitation. She had not thrown her son away. She had simply stopped abandoning herself to keep other people comfortable. And in doing so, she had finally reclaimed something far more valuable than control of the house. She had reclaimed her own life. Elaine lifted her coffee, leaned back in the chair beside the rain-covered window, and smiled quietly into the peaceful silence of her home at last.